Hi, Paul. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me on here.
You're welcome. Thank you for being with us. You're going to talk about um, the shift from screenwriting to playwriting. Although
Yes.
you live in both camps, I know. We're going to touch on a play reading you had of your first ever play, I think, your fully formed play
First,
a couple
yeah.
of months ago. And we're going to kind of unpack what that experience was like for you. And I was there, which is going to be useful. So, first of all, tell us who you are. What's your job?
I am Paul Chronell. I'm a writer. I have written in almost all the genres at one time or other. Started off writing sketch comedy for the telly, then putting together game show proposals. I even wrote some ranges of unpublished greetings cards. And then I started writing screenplays. I had quite a lot of luck in the beginning. The very first screenplay I ever wrote was turned into a film, and from that I was able to get an agent, get a second film made, and that's what I've been doing now for the last 10, 11 years. But more recently, just before lockdown, in fact, I wanted to write for the theatre. I trained as an actor originally, always thought that was where my career was going to go. So I've always loved the theatre, always loved plays, reading plays, but I'd never written a full length before. And because there was so much time and because everything had closed down, I'd had an idea brewing for about 6 months. I'd made some notes. So I sort of was lucky enough to be able to rattle it off because there was nothing else to disturb me, and that was Millstones. And yeah, as soon as it was, I mean, it didn't take a great deal of time to write. I think because I could write on it, work on it so intensively, which was great. And then very soon after it was finished, did a couple of drafts myself. Then we had the reading.
Right. So, how was that shift, like going from screenwriting to playwriting? What was that like? I mean, it's a completely different mode, isn't it? Really.
Well, I loved it. One of the things I hate is a strong word, dislike enormously about the screenwriting is that as soon as you have finished a script and anyone shows any interest in it, the very first thing everybody does is tell you how it should be different. They love it, but they want everything changing. So your work, you have to re-own it every time somebody reads it. A director reads it, a producer reads it, and you have to work in notes, and it stops being yours, and then you have to apply your own voice, work in the notes, and re-own it. But I think there was with a play, I know a couple of only a couple of playwrights, and the level of control they have, it's not absolute by any means, but there's a greater respect for the words on the page. It seems to be further down the line of being ready to be seen, produced. A screenplay is very much seen as it's just square one. Now, what do we all want to do with the 100 pages you've written? Almost as if it's instantly forgotten that that lots of work has already gone into it. It's why sometimes with a screenplay, if you just have an idea and a treatment, it's before you've sort of put loads of yourself into it, you can go to someone with a 2-page outline and say, do you like this? Because then if they say no, it just goes on a pile of ideas that you're not going to do right now. But the play, I liked the fact that it's whereas with a screenplay, as little as possible goes on the page. The film is very much a visual medium, even though I very often argue against that. If you watch any indie films, they are far more chatty. They don't obey the paradigms of the old Hollywood movie 3-act structure. I love dialogue. So in a film script, you have to be as particular as you can be. You have to be it has to be as sparsely filled with dialogue. So the idea of going to a stage play locked into one location, just with two characters who obviously have to talk to each other all the time. It felt far more playful. You felt you could write with a big thick paintbrush rather than writing with a scalpel, if that makes sense. You're constantly looking at your film script, looking at that 10-word sentence to see if it could exist as an 8-word sentence or a 5-word sentence or no sentence at all. But there was something, it felt to me, something very freeing about having characters who have to talk to each other. And you're less bothered about the action of the piece. I mean, obviously the stage play has its plot beats. This needs to happen, this needs to happen. But in the screenplay, it has to be so densely plotted to make up for the fact that there's nowhere near as much dialogue. And also because that's simply what the medium demands. Whereas with the theatre, it just felt that I was freer to be able to tell precisely the story I wanted to. It didn't mean there wasn't loads of rewriting of the dialogue. There was, but you know, if I want a line to be funny and it needs to be 6 lines long, it's a 6-line funny piece of dialogue. Whereas in a screenplay, you might have to do it with a glance. It just felt like the canvas felt so much bigger to me.
Right. Have you ever, when you're typing, when you've been writing your play, was there ever a moment when you went, oh no, that's not theatre, that's film language or film?
Yes, I think occasionally with a screenplay, because it's all visual, if you you have to describe what you would see on the screen. So there's, certainly the way I write screenplays, there's I don't write action insofar as, you know, the actor must pick up a glass with his left hand, pauses halfway there. I don't do anything as detailed as that. But if they do need to look out the window to see the car that just pulled up, or you want them to hear it because that's relevant, then you put that in. I think to begin with the stage play, I wanted to describe the play I could see in my head while I was writing it, as if the stage, if you like, the cross arch I could see in my head. I sometimes got stuck trying to describe that as if it was a television or a film screen. So I had a tendency to put too much direction in for the actors, because, you know, some of them can think for themselves.
Yeah, no, it's a weird one to figure out, because I've started to write screenplay in screenplay format now. I just wanted to teach myself, and I find it fascinating. I'm over describing scenes, and now I'm learning to make sure, like you say, you're describing what is on the screen and describing things almost physically rather than poetically.
Yes, yeah, I think there is that, because I think all writing, there's a huge element of control, because you are the initial spark. You're the god of the piece. All these little characters do exactly what you want, say what you want. But like I said, unless you're a screenwriter, in which case you're sort of like you're God on day 1 of the 7 days of the creation, and then you're the god that gets forgotten, who has to sit in the corner getting dusty while all the other filmmaking gods add their aspects to the piece. And very often on day 7, when the world is complete, you can barely recognize it. But in the theatre, it's that the control for me of in some ways it felt more simplistic. I don't mean the medium itself, the process. So here's what I want to do. These are the words I want. This is the story I want. And because I can see it already in my head, because I know how theatre works and I know what theatre looks like, you know, especially if it's a traditional cross arch play, then it feels like I can be God up until about day 4. It feels like that, you know, before directors and actors and designers, you know, add their specialities to it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You'll get a lot of actors applauding what you just said. So you had a play reading
Yeah,
of what you consider to be your first fully formed play.
yeah.
Um, how was that from your point of view? How did it feel? Were there any moments where you were like, "Oh, that really works"? "Oh, I'm not so sure about that." What was there? Was there anything in there? In that
Well,
experience?
it was terrifying leading up to it, because again, the solitude of writing, everything I wanted was on the page. It worked. The actors in my head did exactly what I wanted them to do and said all the lines precisely the way I thought they would be said. So it was terrifying to think whether what I'd written on the page was going to translate to the actors when they spoke, because obviously I knew the nuance of the lines. They would interpret the lines. So it was a bit scary. It's supposed to be, it is a funny play. I guess it's supposed to be a funny play. But up until you sit with an audience and they laugh or don't laugh, it's not a funny play. It's just a play. So there's that fear of that thing that it is funny in my head. Will it be funny to other people? Will it translate? The experience itself was brilliant. A big help of that was that the three actors, but the two main actors especially, who are very established, were brilliant. So to put your baby into the hands of people who know what they're doing. I've done one or two semi-rehearsed readings years ago of TV stuff, just with friends, and they were horrible experiences because you just got people who were available that afternoon and would come in, and there was no money, there was no nothing, like, so it was just, could you come in and read this so I can hear it? And so the level of commitment to that was very low, and it was quite it was a difficult experience. Whereas this, because you gave it to people who pick up scripts for a living, and they are very established, it was so interesting to see their interpretation just from the page, because I had no conversations with either of them before the reading. I offered that, but so they just did it the way the text appeared to instruct them. So that was very, very useful, because obviously a lot of what they said was very different to the voices in my head. But it was, most of the time, it was better because it was new and it was different, and it was funny when it was supposed to be funny. It was quite touching when it was supposed to be touching. And what was nice, it was funny when in my head, it wasn't. That some of the bits that in my head weren't necessarily that funny came across, but that was the performance. So that was nice to know that there was enough on the page for the actors to create stuff that I didn't even know was there.
Yeah. So just go back to you said that they said stuff different to what you expected. Can you be more specific? Did they elevate lines to places? Did it change plot? Did it make anything vibrate, shudder, or?
Well, no, there were from the performance itself. On the whole, that was just a big tick box that the play did what I wanted it to do. The stuff that they did, the two main actors did differently. The pace of the piece was faster than I had expected it, but I was very pleased it worked at a greater pace than the one I'd heard in my head. But it was the feedback from after the reading where work on the play, where the notes that I made after the reading came from. The feedback, there was you yourself and several other people there made a comment about the way one character was presented or not on stage, and it was useful. I think there's a communion of ideas, because I'm never a fan of getting a note off a single person and then panicking, because everybody's got a note about everything if you ask them. But when you get collective thinking, you know, and the same things come up, you go, well, that's great, especially because I was very lucky that the reading had an intelligent audience, you know, and by that I mean theatre goers, people who understand the industry, people who work in the industry. That meant that the notes weren't, you know, like if my family had seen it, they'd have gone, oh, isn't it lovely? You know, and you go, that's thanks, but not helpful. So the experience was, I'd gone in wanting to tick the boxes that the plot held together, that actors didn't just come up to me just before we started and go, I really don't understand what's happening in this scene. Can we just, you know, can you talk to me about that? They were able to take what was on the page and bring it alive. That was my second thing. It had to be funny, and people laughed, so that was great. And people had to think that they'd gone on a journey. And so I was able to tick those boxes as soon as we'd finished. But then I wanted to get into the what do people think? I mean, I know from your sharings of yours and with your work, you always have questions that you ask, and I didn't go in with any questions per se. I think because I'm not as experienced as writing as a theatre, as a playwright, that I just wanted to see what worked. But the feedback I got was very useful. I mean, it also prepared me for feedback when people outside of the reading then read it, because they had similar suggestions to you guys in the room. So it worked as a sort of, it was a very kind sharing. It had a nice audience. It felt like when a person stands up at a wedding to give a speech, it's the best crowd you could ever have. Everyone wants it to be a success. So it did succeed. I got good notes, and it was just nice to see that two very experienced actors knew what to do with it.
Yeah, that's the gift, isn't it? So the last question then: if somebody is thinking about doing a play reading, tell us what you learned, and then, you know, would you recommend it? Would you recommend the process of having a unrehearsed play reading, basically?
Well, I think the having it unrehearsed is the recommendation I would give, because it's your play. The play reading works best if you have no idea what's going to happen. If you're involved, even if you're at a couple of readings, you become the director of it. And then it's less of an experience for the writer, and it's more putting on a performance, albeit, you know, in a rehearsal space or someone's kitchen or whatever. I think the unrehearsed nature of it is precisely the way I would want to do it again in the future. I think it makes such a difference to hear the interpretation of stuff you think you know really well. And you do know it really well. You know, it's been rattling around your head the whole time you've been writing it, but seeing it out there is invaluable. I'm sure it can be absolutely terrifying as well. If, you know, if it hadn't been funny, if the actors weren't able to work with it, if the plot was clumsy and the audience didn't understand it, but at least that would have made it a less enjoyable experience, but it would have been just as useful, because you have to know those things if you want there to be an onward journey for the play. You want someone to produce it. You want it to be seen by a big audience. So I would definitely recommend it. Sorry, what was the second part to that question?
What did you learn from it? Did you go away and go, right, I actually now I'm going to shift that line. I'm going to dramaturgically move this for whatever reason. Changed.
Do you know, I sat there with a pad and a pen, thinking that I would make forensic notes based on it, and I wrote nothing at all. So I think what I always do when I finish anything is to just put it on one side and leave it alone. I mean, I came home after the reading and I wrote down as much as everyone had said about any aspect of it, but I really haven't revisited those notes yet. I wanted to put it on one side, come to it brand new, and I will no doubt edit it down. I may change some very small things, but nothing happened in the experience that made me want to completely take it apart and rebuild it. There is that aspect that you and I talked about a character and how that character is presented, because I think it's written wrong. I think it needs to be written in a different way. I, as yet, don't know precisely how to do that. So many people gave me the note that the one thing I did change in the script was to put in a note straight away that this third character, it was a cop-out, could be presented in any way the director saw fit. Because so many people said that should be different. But I didn't instantly go, yes, so it should be this. I just went, yeah, it should be different. I've no idea. I'll make it someone else. But that was the only major change I made in the script.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Just thinking of all of the things that you're talking about. It's about interpretation, isn't it? I think as a writer as well, that you kind of hope that whatever you put on the page interprets to a screen or to the stage. That's the hope, isn't it? And that you put your baby in safe hands, but you also are willing to do that. That's, like you say, it's very brave to just give your piece away and to let anyone have a go, and you not to interfere is probably the deepest learning curve, I suspect.
Well, I think it feels like a test, a litmus test, because if I didn't think that script was at least, say, 75, 80% there in those different areas I wanted clarification on, I wouldn't have let people do it. So I have to own it first, entirely on the page, so that if a person were to ask any question about it or suggest a thing that doesn't necessarily work, I hope that because I have owned it, I'll be able to say, yes, but it does work. It works the way I want it to. There might be a different way of doing it. I mean, there's always a different way of doing it. But so long as you can own the words on the page, then you won't be too surprised.
Yeah.
I would recommend it. I would if you can get but do if you're going to do it, get actors. Don't get your friends who want to be actors.
Yeah.
Get people who know how to read a text, and
Yeah, definitely. Cool. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Paul.
No problem at all. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.